Today, chess kids, we're going to see why knowledge of the rules can be very important in a chess game. This wasn't just any chess game. This is one of the final games of the ChessKid Youth Speed Chess Championship match between Megan Paragua, who was white, and black was Alvaro Torres from Spain. Although Megan went on to win the match, Alvaro showed some really good knowledge of the rules. Now, the clocks were ticking down, so both of these master players had to play quickly. And in this position, if it was black's move, you'd probably see a great move for black because these rooks are lined up. And if Alvaro played the move pawn to f5 check, we'll go ahead and make that move on the board, except we won't because it's white's turn. But you can just look at the arrows. If we play pawn to f5 check, then when white takes back, Alvaro will use his Torres, after all, his last name is Torres, to play rook takes rook. So Megan actually stops that by playing the move g5. And now I can actually show you on the board, because after g5, it almost looks like, hey, she did nothing to stop the Spaniard's trick with f5 check. But wait a minute. Remember that rule? It's not Spanish, it's French. It's called en passant. When a pawn is on the starting square, as Alvaro's pawn was, and it moves 2 squares, you can capture it by moving diagonal to the square in front of it. A good question to ask yourself, could I have captured that pawn if it had moved 1 square? The answer to that, of course, is yes. If the pawn had moved 1 square, then white's pawn could capture black en passant. And of course, white's pawn would actually guard the rook, thus nullifying the tactic. So, if you could have captured the pawn if it had moved 1 square, then you can capture the pawn if it moves 2. So if the pawn moves 2 squares, our server is not getting sick. Our server understands this move and would have allowed pawn takes pawn. And here, white would be winning. White would win the pawn, guard the rook, and the extra pawn would come down the board and get a touchdown. So, in this position, Alvaro probably saw that, and he played this cheeky little move, king to h4. Okay, it looks like he's attacking the pawn. Of course he's not. The rook is defending. What he's really doing is buying time. He is waiting for white to push that pawn further down the board. And Megan, who had very little time, obliged. She played g6, which under any normal circumstance would be great. Because, of course, this pawn is pinned, and if the pawn takes, then it is her rook that will capture Alvaro's rook. But wait a minute. Now en passant is not legal because the white pawn is too far down the board. Now in this position, black did play f5. En passant is not legal. Remember that question? Could I have captured that pawn if it had moved 1 square? Well, let's ask ourselves that question. Could white have captured the black pawn if it had moved 1 square? No, you cannot. Pawn takes pawn is not legal here. I will attempt to make the move, and even FunMasterMike cannot overrule the ChessKid server. So in this position, it would not be possible to play en passant. That's why waiting for the pawn to come to g6 and playing f5 check now, that was the winner chicken dinner, because now the king had to take. Alvaro played rook takes rook, and with the extra rook, of course, he went on to win the game. White resigned. One way the game could have ended would be if the king came down the board. Alvaro is fine giving up the rook for the pawn, for example. He might move his rook all the way over, not off the board. And then if white pushes, he can move his rook down the board, and if white's king moves, he's waited as long as possible, and then he'll just push his pawn. And even though white gets a queen, not a big deal, because the rook will take, and the king will take, and the pawn will move. Of course, he could have sacrificed his rook for the pawn earlier, but I'm just showing you that he could have waited as well. So, knowledge of en passant. In this case, knowledge that your opponent could do it to you, and waiting for it not to be legally allowed, was the big trick. You don't see that one every day, but that's why these are the ChessKid Youth Speed Chess Champions.